I actually see this sort of human potential as one of the magical gifts that we can activate with each other and practice how to use, because we don't see a lot of it modelled in our world around us. In fact, a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the world today need humans to develop more of this collective intelligence and creativity together.
Welcome back to the SDN podcast. I'm your host, David Salomon. In today's episode, we have the pleasure of speaking with Mark Spain, a steward of the land with a passion for regenerative practices and leadership development. Mark shares his current project, Yirrubadala, a year-long leadership learning program aimed at bringing together a diverse group of individuals from the community to collaboratively address the challenges brought about by the bushfires in 2019 to 2020. He opens up about his introduction to SDN through a Quaker friend, leading him to embark on a transformative workshop experience in the Snowy Mountains. Throughout our conversation, Mark reflects on the dynamics of human interaction and how they resemble his mountaineering expeditions. He shares valuable insights into fostering open communication, curiosity, and creativity within a group. So join us as Mark leaves us with profound wisdom on the power of life-affirming communication and restorative practices, encouraging us to embrace challenges, listen deeply, and grow together on the path to transformation. Let's dive into the second episode of the SDN podcast with the remarkable Mark Spain.
My name's Mark Spain, and I live on Ngunnawal and Lambrie land in Canberra, although I was born in Ngarigo country in the Snowy Mountains and grew up in Cooma. I think I'd describe myself as learning to be a steward of our country, between the mountains and the sea, and have us collectively learn how to live in a way that is healing country and healing people, so regenerative practices. I design and facilitate or host, leadership development programs. And leadership's a pretty loaded word, so it's really getting people to collaborate with each other and deal, respectfully with each other, even when there's conflict. A lot of my work involves dialogue, which is, basically listening deeply to each other and trying to find collective wisdom from, more deeper listening to each other and the land.
As an example, Mark, can you outline a project that you're working on at the moment?
Yes, I'm working on a program called Regenerate Yirrubadala, which is a local government region down the south coast from where I live. And it suffered, major damage in the bushfires in 2019 and 20. And we've got, 20 people who are doing a year-long leadership learning program. They come from the community, small businesses, even some arts people, some Indigenous people working for local council, learning self-awareness, how to work in a team, collaborating with differences, understanding how you're different from other people, and then working across teams and in organisations, and also working in complex systems and in communities and landscapes. And then, the real key part of this is action learning. So getting an embodied experience of what it is to be, an agent of change or making something happen in your community and your landscape. So that program's going on at the moment. And, I'm really enjoying that. It's trying to heal country and heal people.
I'd like to just cast back and ask you to tell us how you come to be doing what you're doing now.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a large family. I was the oldest in my family. I went to university and studied mathematics and science. And when I finished my degree, my mother organised for me to do an outward bound course in North Queensland in the rainforest, just south of where you've been, up at Mossman, but around Gordonvale, around the pyramid on the Mulgrave River, and out to sea on Hinchinbrook Island Anyway, I had a 26-day experience there. Being in nature, like nature was such a powerful creator of a learning experience of people working together to feed themselves and navigate their way around. And we had a solo time, 3 days by ourselves. I was on an island on the Great Barrier Reef. Fantastic. So that had quite a powerful impact on me, and so I really got involved in experiential learning, and I wanted to find some ways to work in that space because most of our traditional learning and teaching is very didactic and sort of expert driven, whereas experiential learning is more valuing the experience of people who've had it and facilitating and sharing insights. I mean, that doesn't preclude having expert views as well. So I got into leadership development and teamwork by using outdoor experiences as the vehicle for people to be more self-aware of how their behaviour impacted on others in teams by just doing simple activities outside and then debriefing them. So I learnt some facilitation and debriefing skills and listening skills through doing that work. That's how I got into doing this.
Over the period of time, say from your university days and that outward bound experience, have you found yourself on a steady trajectory from that time?
Oh no, I'd say what it is to be successful in life came up, like what like this idea of having a career and what sort of work you do. I think my parents created an environment for me where I wasn't, I noticed I wasn't desperate to get into making money or having a particular profession, but they really created a safe environment for me to be a learner. So I think I've been, and that when you're on that path in a society that's very driven by money and status and career progression, you have to be pretty proactive to choose that path rather than sort of just fold into the mainstream game.
What business were your parents in? Did watching how they lived their life? Obviously, it would have had an impact on you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's interesting that when I grew up, my mother and father got married when they were about 23. So, that's quite a different thing nowadays. And my father is an engineer. So when he graduated in Adelaide, he got a job and on the Snowy Mountain scheme. I mean, he had a job, I think, down in Victoria in the brown coal power stations, only for a short period of time, and then he started working as a civil engineer, roads and dams and things like that in the Snowy Mountains. And my mother was a nurse. She was nursing in Melbourne, but when they got married, she essentially, left her career and became a full-time mother. And so I got brought up in an environment where, my home environment was a safe, loving sort of space. And, our family could live on one income. And I would say I was fairly privileged. I didn't know it at the time. I just thought this was normal. So I had that care and concern and love and connection in the family that I grew up in. But I wouldn't have said that my father or mother's career shaped my decisions necessarily.
So jumping ahead then, how and when did you first get in contact with SDN?
In my work in my leadership development and using dialogue as a practice for collective wisdom making, dealing with tough, stuck issues, I was part of a group at the Australian National University called the ANU Dialogue Group. And we were practicing using different dialogue methodologies. The main one was Bohemian dialogue, which is really just a way of deep listening and not trying to advocate for your own position, but expressing yourself clearly about what you wanted to say, but also listening deeply to what others said and then to build on the conversation. So it's a creative process, collectively listening to each other, and new insights come from that. So one of the people in that group was a Quaker, and the Quakers have a practice of a lot of silence in their sitting in circle. I think even the name Quaker sort of says, you wait until you quake, until you sort of move to speak. So, just these different ways of humans being together in conversation with each other and listening to each other. So one of the people in the group, David Purnell, who is a Quaker, one time shared with me an opportunity for an SDN workshop. I didn't know much about it, and it was up at a ski resort in the Snowy Mountains over summer. And the idea was it's 4 days, and he sort of said to me, like I said to him, what's it about? David's not very pushy at all, so, I wasn't really predisposed to do it. But when he gave me the guidelines for how the SDN workshop would run, that really tickled my curiosity. I can't remember exactly what they were, but a lot of it was around being self-aware of how you show up in a community of other people. And each person, had the chance to tell a story or present themselves, something about themselves, or that they're challenging them, or they've got questions about, to the rest of the group. And over the 4 days, everyone gets a chance to do that. And then you sort of, cook dinner together and have a meal and go for a walk and spend time together with people who, well, for me, I didn't know any of them. And so, I suppose I sort of kept a bit of a low profile to start with. And as I've been on more workshops, I probably showing up a bit more strongly in different ways in that environment.
When was that first contact with it? What year would that have been?
Maybe 2015 or something like that.
While we're talking about SDN workshops, I'd like to take a moment to share some exciting news. The Social Development Network, that's SDN, is organising a workshop in September at Riverdale Spiritual Centre near Adelaide. Whether you're a community leader, a change maker, or someone passionate about creating positive social impact, this workshop may be for you. Together we'll embark on a journey of self-discovery, open communication and collective growth. I'll give the details at the end of the episode. Now let's get back to our conversation with Mark Spain. You talk about how you show up, I think were the words you used. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, particularly from the point of view of how, that group energy it reflects back as well, doesn't it? You get to see parts of yourself in that environment that you may not otherwise know about, I guess.
When you first mentioned the question like that, David, and you're respectfully trying to get me to speak from what my experience is of that, I was thinking of my experience of being on expedition in nature. And I've done quite a bit of mountaineering where, you start off as a sort of there's not much pressure in the team. You're pretty cohesive. It's easy to work together and share things. If you got some food, you can share it with others. You help someone else get some water or put up a tent or whatever. There's not much friction happening. But as the conditions get more challenging, it's very easy for you to just be looking after yourself, and also just to sort of only be aware of what's going on for yourself and trying to survive yourself or trying to deal with things. So when other people have needs that they need to get met, they can be a bit of an intrusion on your sort of way of managing yourself. And you sort of, sometimes you've got the capacity and empathy to actually stop and listen. You have to get out of your own headspace and own experience and find out what's going on for this other person. They could be whinging, they could be expressing joy, they could, all sorts of things could be happening than different what's going on for you. What I find in all of this stuff is that I get really curious about how other people's experience of something can be quite different from mine. And rather than sort of dismissing them, which I might have done when I was a bit younger, although I must admit I think I've been curious about this all my life, is that I just start to say, wow, there's something going on for them that's completely different from the way that I'm dealing with this situation. I wonder what that is, and how can I listen to that and have compassion for it and what have you. And sometimes you can be not so compassionate and you haven't got time for people and you can be a bit dismissive. I must admit, when I'm like that, I feel very bad about myself when I behave like that. But sometimes if I'm under pressure myself, I can behave in ways that I would later on regret. these sorts of questions come up when you're with people for a bit of time and, someone else is just a bit of a niggle for you, the way they express themselves or what have you. Like I've noticed that I don't like whingers, like, what happens when I'm whinging? What happens when I'm dissatisfied with things? Do I use the same standards for myself? It's a very interesting environment when you're on expedition with people or you're together with people, and you can travel along pretty well. You think you'll be able to go pretty well, but then something happens where you sort of get a bit agitated about something, or you want to express yourself, and someone else wants to talk, and do you cut across them? Or do you wait your turn, and then when you wait, you forget what you wanted to say, and you're sort of sitting on this sort of energy that's unresolved, and so all of these things play out, and everyone and you also assume that the same thing's happening for everybody else. Like what's going on for you, it could be happening for others in different ways. So invariably, there's a bit of a spillover, and there's someone behaves unilaterally. They haven't really checked with anybody else and they sort of do something that they think's the right thing to do, but they haven't sought anyone else's view about it, and suddenly someone else says, well, hang on, you've overstepped a line. We agreed something different than that, and now you're doing this. And so you're starting to talk about the process of being together with other people as well as just, the stuff that you wanted to bring up. So you've got a couple of dimensions working now. And then do you just go quiet on it and not discuss it? But you sort of, it sits inside you for a while and you think, well, how should I deal with that? And, so all of these things happen. And really it's a microcosm of what goes on in the world anyway, except you're just with a small group of people for 4 days, and, you're staying engaged with all of that and trying to learn and grow from it. Well, that's the way I see myself going on to that, not trying to diminish other people or fix them or put them down, but to stay curious myself and say, wow, I didn't see it like that, and what can I learn about that, and how's this helping me in other challenges that I've got in my life, things like that.
Everyone, I think, who has been in that situation will recognise, and for a workshop it has an end point, so eventually if there's still things hanging around they find a release that way, but when you work in community that's not the case. If the need is great enough, you absolutely do have to find a resolution to some things that are a niggle, that become a burr, that become a sore, whatever it is. How do you work out the next step? How do you proceed?
Yeah, well, this is a good one, David. And, I would say my whole life, and I'm assuming everyone else's life, has been the journey of how to deal with these things, and for me, I've learned that I could just hold my breath and sit on it until the end, and just go home. But then, I've left something unresolved and stuck, and, I'm still carrying a burden. So I actually learnt this earlier on. So how can I learn to be more really me, where I don't feel embarrassed about having this experience because it's a human experience. So, but I do need to express myself in a way where I take responsibility for the experience that I'm having, and I'm not blaming anyone else for it. So that was one of the first practices that really got me focused, is how can I take responsibility for this energized situation or emotional situation that I'm experiencing without blaming someone else in the group for it, and communicate in a way that doesn't shut them down or trigger them or traumatize, or activate some of the traumas that they've had, and that we can lean into this difference of opinion, or this sort of curious area that needs further exploration, and stay fully human, connected, and creative. So I actually see this sort of human potential as one of the magical gifts that we can activate with each other and practice how to use, because we don't see a lot of it modelled in our world around us. In fact, a lot of the challenges that we're facing in the world today need humans to develop more of this collective intelligence and creativity together, not by avoiding conflict, but by leaning into it. So for me, I've learnt to, when it comes up, is to express myself about it. So to not let it linger. I mean, I might think about it a bit before I say something, but even when I say something, I might rub people up the wrong way, but I then try and regroup in a way that I said, well, I could have done that better. So, it's a constant game. And I also am aware that, I'm a white male, so I carry quite a bit of privilege. So if I have a conflict with someone who comes from, a disadvantaged group who's lived their whole life with patriarchy and empire and colonisation and control, so all of those sort of things and I'm not aware of those experiences, is that, I need to have a lot of humility, a lot of listening, but I also need to show up with what's going on for me as well. I mean, some of the skills that I've learned for this, it would be called life-affirming communication or restorative practice or non-violent communication. But you're not avoiding the issue, so you're leaning into it, but you're expressing yourself in a way that creates safety and curiosity and engagement.
There's an aspect of this that I think about a lot, and that is that we can inadvertently present trauma triggers for people. People can find themselves in a place where they're not at all comfortable and may not feel in control, and it starts to spill out. It seems to me that that's inevitable sooner or later, and we go looking for a transformational experience. It's about the need for vulnerability. How do you deal with vulnerability given that you need to have it?
Yeah. I think from my experience is you don't know when it'll come up. You don't want to start off being fearful of it and trying to avoid it and set up all these ground rules to sort of manage it when it happens, because everyone's just walking on eggshells, if you overcook it. But if you set up a process where every person gets a chance to express themselves right from the very start, so every voice is heard. And I've been in groups where people didn't even want to use their option of that. They said, no, I've got nothing to say. Or if I encourage them to, now it's your turn to say something if you want to, or you can always pass. But I would have other people saying, you're putting pressure, Mark, on, I can remember an Indigenous woman from the Torres Strait Island whose leadership goal was to learn how to be more assertive and express herself. And she was the only one who hadn't spoken in the group. And I just directed the attention to her. But others jumped in on me, because I'm a white male, and they saw me as putting pressure on her. It activated me. I said, well, if we allow, even though we've got a sense that someone doesn't want to say something, but if we avoid asking them and avoid allowing them to have their turn so that they say, no, I don't want to speak, that's fine if they say that. But if someone else speaks for them saying, no, they don't want to speak, we don't really know, because there's a lot of minority voices who have learnt not to speak, and other people jump in to defend them, thinking that they're being helpful. When you're sitting in a circle and everyone's getting a chance to speak, you can either say what you want to say or pass. But, you're the agent of your own expression. And if you set up a practice like that, there's a few other protocols as well, but, essentially people learn and they start to experience safety because they know that everyone's going to get a chance to speak. No one's going to interrupt them. I mean, you might even use a talking piece because some people speak too much. But other times sometimes people need to speak a lot as well. They just got to get it off their chest. And once they have, they can see the safety and comfort of being in a community of people who are going to be respected, listened to, and everyone gets a chance to do it. And the thing is, when people practice that, they don't even have to be a skilled facilitator. They can do this for themselves. Although it does take a discipline to, there's a lot of pressure on to defer to the person with the most power and the way they want to run a meeting. So what I've learnt over my life of doing this is that even in high status meetings, and I've got no power, I can still suggest, would it be all right if we just heard from everybody in the room before we go on to the agenda? And it might be as simple as, what's your expectations for this meeting and how are you feeling? So there's two different parts of our way of being that's being activated. One is the logical, rational, mental sort of side of things, the practical getting stuff done. And the other is the emotional, activated energy of our feelings and our way of being together. And those two things, when you hear them, some people might have just taken their mother to hospital or whatever, and all sorts of things can happen. And we just bring more of our humanity into our ways of being together with each other. And if we can create those conditions with quite simple ways of going, there's a real power in whatever conversations had then. We can solve some of the biggest problems that we've got in the world, and we can also carry and hold the people who feel the most traumatised, fragile, uncertain, undervalued, and wondering if they were able to contribute. We can do both of those things at the same time. I feel quite excited actually about, I'd call those good leadership practices in holding groups together, and that we can all share how to do that.
I noticed when in groups that we've both been in, where you've invited people, that check-in process, and I found that it was actually quite challenging in a way, not in a negative way, but challenging in the sense of actually doing a personal recap. And I was surprised how such a simple request could be so powerful, I guess. And it comes to something that I wanted to bring up, and that is agency.
Yeah, well, I don't know what's going on for you around agency, David. Maybe you'd have to talk more about that. But I like you brought it up, because agency is something that's very easy taken away from people in the structures that we live in our world, and we don't even question it, and I think it's so powerful when if you're in an environment and people feel that their agency is there. Like sometimes they don't even notice it. So that's why it's like cultivating the soil for humans to grow. And when humans grow, they have agency. So even when you're a little baby, and I remember meeting an Indigenous woman who told her, she wrote a PhD on the pathway to being a leader in Indigenous culture. And she told the transitions in life right through from baby. So even babies are brought up to be the boss of themselves, so that they have agency. But of course, when you're in the Western culture that comes from a whole civilization from Europe and what have you, and Enlightenment and all the sciences and philosophies and everything, it's very individualistic. We've got an individualistic culture, and in fact, we need to collectively learn in our culture how to have agency where we're part of a collective wisdom holding and well-being function. So this is the wisdom that Indigenous people have from all around the world. And I think we really need to relearn. Having agency is not just individually doing what you want, having a free voice. You can have that, but you also know how to speak in community so that you're not, hurting or damaging or putting yourself up above others, but you're being able to express yourself, but also listen deeply. So it's balancing these two skill sets of advocating and expressing yourself, and listening and inquiring and finding out, and getting the right balance there so that everybody is valued and included. So I think agency is really important, and in fact, you can't just intellectualize it and imagine what it's like. You actually have to experience it, and you can see it in groups when everybody, even the person who's most intimidated or fearful or has had trauma in their life, you don't know their experience, but you can see they've been cringing and sort of living a life with a lot of oppression and a lack of permission and uncertainty about whether they've got a voice or not. When the conditions are created where they experience other people expressing themselves clearly, and then they get to do it, that's such a collectively healing activity for all of us, to be in a group like that. And then when they bring wisdom. A person like that brings wisdom from the edge of the system that no one else could have had, because, one day they just say, hang on a sec, I've got more to say on this. They've never done this before in their life. And they describe their experience. Like, I remember a woman who was in domestic violence. Other people were second guessing what was going on for her. And she said, no, just listen to me. I've thought about this. I've even written it down because I know this is, every time before I've burst into tears, but now I know this is a safe place. And I just want to tell you what it's like for me. And, you could hear a pin drop in the room. All of our hearts were beating with full life. And she expressed herself in a way that ran a tingle up my spine. And I just thought, wow, well, first of all, she just was able to have her own agency show up. And she was able to solve some of the problems that she was facing rather than being a victim. Look, that's just one example, but there's quite a few where when people can show their agency, it's just transformative for everybody in the group, how it works. And even as I talk about it now, I want to have more experiences in my life where I'm involved with other people with that sort of agency present. And we're all timid and shy and uncertain, and, there's big oppressive forces around and we can't change things. But, when we're together, we can create those conditions for that sort of agency to show up.
One of the ingredients that's needed there is learning how to be courageous.
Absolutely.
How does that happen? Because we often start in these places in deficit situations where we identify something needs to be fixed and can quite easily go to fixing it, which is really quite often disastrous. Whereas if we can look for how do we reintroduce the agency you talked about and courage as a precursor for that perhaps, what's your thoughts about that?
Well, you can't legislate for courage. You can't sort of say everybody, you've got to be courageous, and expect it to happen. It's like, you can trust everybody here, those sorts of things don't do it. So you have to learn to grow those muscles. And so it is by setting up simple practices, as I said before, of allowing each person, even if they've got nothing to say and they use their turn, to just say, I've got nothing to say. But they still stay there listening to other people. And sometimes it can be pretty superficial. People just say, oh, it's a lovely day today, and, I'm feeling good, and, I just want to get on with the work and that sort of stuff. There's a lot of people who talk like that. But then someone in the group, it just goes to a level deeper because they've heard everybody else speak. But now they and this is where courage comes from, because they've got a choice to just keep it superficial, like what everyone else has been doing. But when I've been in this situation, what I notice is I get a bit tired of just repeating superficiality. So someone takes the risk, and courage involves risk taking. I'm prepared to be more vulnerable here. My authentic self is not showing up here. I've got some dialogue, little talk inside my head that's saying, this is bullshit. This is not going deep enough. So I say, I'm really feeling, upset about, the voice to Parliament or whatever, or the way it's playing out. And I feel a bit stuck. I don't know what to do. I feel like, this could fail. And I feel like we're going to be really in a deeper problem as a country if we don't deal with this question more honestly with each other. So that might be, how I show. And then I sort of say that, and then I say my expectations for this meeting, or, whatever, that's my emotional side showing up. And then, I want to go explore a bit more deeply the differences that we have with each other, but to treat each other respectfully about that, and not to judge each other, but to be curious with each other, whatever it is. So I say that, and then I put the piece back or pass to the next person. And suddenly the next person's got a choice just to go back to superficial stuff, or they might say, oh, where does my courage come from? What's the edge of my vulnerability or my authenticity or my humanity, or how I want to show up? I could just sort of retreat back. And some people do. You can see them sort of, maybe not this time. It's not for me now. I'm feeling a bit fragile. da 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 da. I don't think I'm ready to talk about it today, and move on. But then the ice has been broken, and people can feel and experience collectively the energy of vulnerability, authenticity, humanity, courage. And when that window's open to us from anybody in the group, sort of opening that opportunity, we actually get drawn into it. We feel the safety and the honesty and the warmth and the possibility of being a human being with these other people risking themselves. And so we don't have to fight over the top of each other to see who's the most courageous. We're all sort of, but we've experienced it. And sometimes courage comes from the people with the lowest status and all these sorts of things. So, in a way, it reverses some of the roles, and we start to really respect people who've got a different story from us and how they've dealt with it. And, all sorts of things can happen. So courage, you're dead right, Sal, that, courage, you can't manufacture it, but if you just create safety and humility and generosity and gratitude and respect for everybody, those are the conditions that generate this agency and courage and vulnerability and risk taking, and also, eventually strength and new ways of seeing things and collective action that can turn stuck situations into new opportunities.
As I listen to you talk about this now, I'm thinking, are you talking about the experience within an SDN workshop, or are you talking about the work you're doing with restorative practice? And it occurs to me that maybe there isn't a clear boundary between those two different experiences in your line of work.
Well, it's good that you've framed it like that, because I would probably say that I wouldn't have said the SDN workshop was necessarily the primary place where this experience happens. I think in my work, I've been much more intentional about bringing that in. And maybe part of the difference is that often in my work, a lot of the agency at the start is with me because of, I'm the host of the event. And so people come a bit unsure about whether they should be, offering something or what have you. So there's a bit of structure there already. And after the first 3 days, where we have a pretty tightly designed structure of experiential learning and giving people an opportunity to practice things for themselves as leaders and reflect on their practice, but it's all sort of, in a way, orchestrated from, a design intention that's not theirs. But after that, when they start to have agency to design activities themselves and conversations, they bring their design and intention and vulnerability and authenticity or whatever, or just their transactional, project management, whatever they want to bring, that plays out. But in the SDN workshop, really, it's sort of structured in a way where each person just gets a chance to hold the floor and either tell a story or conduct a process or run an activity, and that some of that may involve people at different levels, or request people to come up with sort of their own thinking on it, or sometimes it's very sort of driven by the person hosting the event, and then it's not even reflected on that much. It just sort of ends after the time, and depending on what the topic was, everyone could be, pretty charged up about it, or disengaged, or really wanted to talk more about it, or debrief it, or what have you. But that needs to happen in the breaks. Usually you talk with someone else if you're a bit activated about it. So in a way, the SDN design process doesn't really create space for exactly what I'm talking about there. And maybe, I could say, well, that's a bit of a weakness of the SDN process. But on the other hand, if you leave a few spaces around that are open for emergent, I would call these the things that crop up that you didn't expect, emergent processes, and they're juicy things to do, and you could have a process for dealing with those as they come up, and I think I'm quite interested in that myself. The things that you didn't expect to happen on the agenda are starting to show up, and where do we get to talk about those or deal with them, and what have you. So
what is it that keeps you coming back to the SDN?
Well, I don't always keep doing them. I'll just say that. So, but I have come back regularly. Ned Eyston, who's basically he's left his estate, a legacy of his way of being in the world. He felt that the SDN workshop was a fantastic vehicle for continuing some practices that were good for human development, and good for us all. That's so he's given a gift. And the way I've seen it since I've been involved, I went to my first workshop. I met Ned. He was an older man, and he carried a lot of gravitas, and there was a lot of stories, about the history of this activity. It's been going on for a long time,
50 years.
Yeah, and then he passed away after that. So in some way, and then when I heard that, he left some money for the board to, which were some friends of his, to sort of carry it on. And I've seen that group of people, try and sort of bring it more into the world, but really it's sort of stayed within a small group of people, who are getting older and older. So in some ways, this gift to the world, I'd like to see it be more available to, people who are really curious about, creating these sorts of ways of managing change and respecting people and looking after people and individual growth as well as big systems change. I sort of see those sort of things mixed together in the SDN process. I'm a bit itchy for sort of trying out some new ways of offering this to other people as a gift for them, and to see maybe how it could evolve. Even those people might say, well, look, could we do it a little bit this way? Because, I'd like what you're saying, but I want a bit more of this. I think I'd be willing to test it out to see how it could evolve.
Well, I think it's worth saying at this point that SDN, Social Developers Network, is a part of, but separate from, the NED Foundation that you mentioned before, that Ned left. And there is a certain amount of autonomy, though not total autonomy, in the SDN, so it actually does have the capacity to determine its own course, if you like, while the foundation has its own projects and other activities, which I won't go into here. But one of the things that is talked about with the NED Foundation is this process of evolution, nurturing evolutionary development is what NED stands for. So I guess there's a sort of a watch this space associated, with this conversation as well. As you say, people get older and organisations change or disappear. It's been great talking with you, Mark. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, either about anything, really?
Well, can I say, Sal, it's lovely to have you, tentatively ask me things without trying to strongly shape it by your own views on things. So what comes up for me now is, I wonder what your questions or answers would be to the same questions, how you would explain and explore all of that. That would be really interesting as well. It'd put a bit of mutuality in it. But, I can live without having to have that conversation. But the other thing that I really like about, NED as a foundation built on Ned Eyston's name is nurturing evolutionary development is such a rich, juicy term. To have a philanthropic organisation in our country, in Australia, that is committed to nurturing evolutionary development, and if it does that with the sort of principles behind, the SDN workshop and treating people with respect, and the way we've talked about things today, I just see so much potential in that unfolding some more into the future. So I look forward to trying to contribute to helping that nurturing evolutionary development unfold some more. I think we need some more in our country.
Absolutely. As for your first comment there, Mark, that's got me thinking about the format of this podcast. Whether there's other ways of doing it as well, even though we've just started and you're one of the early participants. So I thank you for that, for both accounts. If people want to know more about what you do, what's the best way for them to find that out?
Yeah, well, if anyone was listening to this podcast and wanted to have a chat to me or explore things some more, they could go to my website, which is globallearning.com.au. My business is called Global Learning. Or they could send me an email at mark@globallearning.com.au or ring me up, 0404 411 353.
Thanks, Mark. Been great as always. Enjoyed it very much. I look forward to next time we chat.
Yeah, lovely, Sal. Thanks for the conversation.
And to you, our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and want to stay updated on future releases, follow us on the Podbean app. Search for the SDN podcast in brackets Social Developers Network. You can also find out more information about today's episode and other exciting content at sdn.ned.org.au/podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this is David Salomon signing off.